My name's Tim. I'm an alcoholic. And Al-Anon has saved my life. I just need to say that as well. I want to thank Ethan for picking me up at the airport, for driving me to the hotel, for driving me to a restaurant, for taking me for dinner. After a long flight from London, that was just what I needed. I did not need to face a car rental experience at that point. I want to thank the committee for inviting me here. And the great advantage of inviting a speaker from London to share in Seattle is if this goes down really badly, you need never see me again in your lives. I'm gonna be gone. I've been shown nothing but kindness since I've been here. I've had a whale of a time. And I've been labelled lots of things, drunk and sober. One of them I've been labelled is a step Nazi and a big book Nazi and all of those things. But one thing my sponsor has driven home to me is something that Dr. Bob purportedly said towards the end of his life about kindness. And I've heard other people say this at the end of their lives in AA, that the one regret is perhaps we could have been a little kinder to each other along the way, which is why what I appreciate more than anything is when people are able to show kindness to me. I've spent a lot of my life confused. I've spent a lot of my time in AA really confused. And one of the things I was really confused about is what an alcoholic is. And I knew when I got to AA that I drank far too much. But the funny thing is, I didn't find out that what I had was a case of real alcoholism until I was 10 years sober. And what happened, I'd left AA for a couple of years. I didn't drink in those 2 years, but I came back because I was lonely and I was terrified and I was a recluse. And I had no choice but to go back to the place I thought had failed me. And I thought, I want to do this properly for the first time. I got sober on the 24th of July, 1993, and someone mentioned it earlier this week, that that was the last time they were separated from alcohol. I've never stopped drinking. I would find myself sober. And when I start drinking again, I saw a film once where someone was walking on ice and the ice cracked and they fell through the ice and the current immediately dragged them under the ice, and there was someone running over the top and they could see this guy under the ice scratching on the surface, trying to grab hold of something. They could see each other, but there was nothing that either of them could do to get the guy out from under the ice. They had to wait till he came past another hole in the ice and they grabbed him and his life was saved. I first stopped drinking in 1990 and I was sober for 2 or 3 months. I started drinking, I was drunk for 9 months. I was sober for 2 months. The next time I was drunk for 15 months. When I go through the ice, I enter a completely different world. I enter a world where the only thing I know is alcohol. And the memory of being sober just isn't even there anymore. The only thing that matters is getting the relief afforded by the first few drinks. That is the only thing that concerns me. And if I were to drink tonight, I'm convinced that I don't know whether I would come back the next day. I've sponsored a lot of people who've come back after a slip, and I give them a bunch of questions, which I heard someone on a tape saying that they gave to their sponsees, someone who David will know. And one of the questions is for you to drink to die? It's very, very dramatic, isn't it? Is to drink, for us to drink is to die. And what that means to me is that if I drink tonight, I may never come back to AA, or I may try to come back to AA and be physically here, but be unable to communicate with you. And in 1995, my friend Paul, who was, I guess, a year and a half sober, 2 years sober, same as me at that point, he was 21. And he drank again. It's now 21 years later, and he's tried to come back several times and is unable to. The physical craving, which is set off when I have a drink, does not just mean that during the course of that evening, I'm going to get drunker and drunker and drunker and drunker and drunker. It's that when I wake up the next morning, I've been altered by that drink that I've had the night before. It has altered me at a chemical level that I don't understand. And I will drink again until, as I say, there's a hole in the ice. And I don't get to choose whether there's a hole in the ice. And the last day I drank was not a very good advert for AA. I was going to lots and lots of AA meetings. When I got to AA, the advice that people gave me was go to 100,000 meetings, which is right. I needed to go to 100,000 meetings. But they didn't tell me what to do when you got to the meeting. They just said go to lots of meetings. I was going to 3 meetings a day. This is back in 1993. I was going to 3 meetings a day. I went to a morning meeting. I went to a lunchtime meeting. The lunchtime meeting, fancy part of town. I fancied myself suited to this fancy part of town. And someone spoke, and I spent the meeting waiting for my opportunity to share my wisdom with the room, which I did at enormous length. This was in the days before bells and buzzers and cards and signs, and we were much politer in those days. I shared and I shared and I shared. And I stopped eventually. I wound up. I thought I'd give someone else a chance. I spent the next 10 minutes wondering what impact I'd made on the people around me. And I realized there was nothing more that I could squeeze out of this meeting. And I'd be going to another one at 3. I'd be going to another one at 6:30, so what the hell. So I left. And I walked up the road. I was 3 weeks sober at this point. I walked up the road, and there's a funny line in the book. It says, the thought crossed my mind. It says it in Jim's story, and it says it in Fred's story. Now, I don't know about you. I don't get to choose what thoughts cross my mind. And then, I didn't get to choose what I did with the thought that crossed my mind. So when the thought that crossed my mind said, let's go for a pint, we all went for a pint. And I didn't even, like Jim, I didn't even sense that I wasn't being any too smart. There's just nothing there. There is no thought in my mind at all. And the book is very interesting because Jim drinks again with the whiskey and the milk. He pours the whiskey in the milk, and he thinks that that'll protect him on a full stomach. And it calls this a peculiar mental twist. So there's just something wrong with his mind. It twists reality. And then with Fred, it calls it a strange mental blank spot. There is a blank spot where information ought to be and just isn't. So what I know from these two stories is sometimes a lie will kill me. Sometimes a blank spot will kill me. In Fred's story, he even says, the thought crossed my mind that a couple of drinks, a couple of cocktails with dinner would be nice. When you read the story, how many cocktails does he have with dinner? 2. Were they nice? I guess so. What his mind told him was absolutely true. A couple of cocktails with dinner would be nice. But there's a gap where the further truth should be. So sometimes people say, oh, the disease lies to you. This is true. It also tells you the truth. Or it just says nothing at all. And someone hands you a drink and you drink it. I'm not safe under any of those scenarios. There's the curious phenomenon that paralleled with our sound reasoning ran some insanely trivial excuse for a drink. So when I'm conflicted, I'm in trouble. So when my mind is telling me the truth, I'm in trouble. When my mind is lying to me, I'm in trouble. When there is nothing there, I'm in trouble. When my mind is conflicted, I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble. I'm just in trouble because of my mind. So back to about 12:05. On Saturday afternoon in Notting Hill. There should be a plaque, but there isn't. The thought crossed my mind that a pint would be great. So I went and had a pint. And I almost felt the horns peeping through the top of my head. But I don't have any choice at this point, and I'm bored because all my friends are sober in the meeting. So I can't go and hang with my friend. What am I going to do? I have another drink. Then I go to the off-license, that's our term for the booze store. I went to the off-license and I bought a bottle of something considerably stronger, an Italian fortified wine, very fragrant, lots of Italian herbs in it. 14% and £2.99. It was the cheapest way to get drunk in London at that point. It was cheaper than even the very strong cheap beers. And so I was drunk for years on this Italian fortified wine. I drank the bottle straight down until there's a heel tap of about 1 inch left at the bottom of the bottle. And I waved merrily to all of the people who were filing out of the meeting, who were nonplussed, and they didn't know what to do with me. I guess some of them had been to an Al-Anon meeting or two because none of them tried to intervene. I've got a story about trying to get between someone else and alcohol. I may get to it later on, but no one tried to... let's go with it now. My friend Tom, who I'm amazed is here and sober, he talks about alcoholism is a lot like dancing with a gorilla. You're not done dancing until the gorilla is done dancing. And this is a family conference. I'm not going to say that, the alternative version of what one does with the gorilla. But there is a little addendum for the Al-Anons, which is this. If you try getting in between the alcoholic and the gorilla, you're going to get your arms and your legs yanked off, and not by the gorilla. No one interfered that day. No one got in the way. They just waved kindly. No one yelled. They waved. And I waved back. And then I threw myself in front of a car and caused an accident. I was run over. I was arrested. Within 20 minutes, I was in a police cell. These were not suggestions I had been given by my sponsor that morning. I had indeed received suggestions from my sponsor. And I think the lesson here is if you're not done, you're not done. And I clearly wasn't done. And I talked my way out of being arrested, or rather charged. I was arrested, but I wasn't charged. And after 4 or 5 hours, they released me from the cells, and I was walking up Notting Hill Gate, and there was a man called Brian, who was one of my heroes. Brian was around 17 years sober. He was from LA but lived in London. I loved Brian. And just one thing on heroes and AA. I know we're supposed to worship the Lord and everything, and not people. But God for me comes in a human skin a lot of the time. There's a 19th century preacher whose sermons I sometimes read. I'm not a particularly religious person, but the sermons are interesting. He talks about people who foolishly bolt their doors and windows lest anyone actually get in there with some advice, and they leave a crack in the ceiling hoping that God will speak to them directly. Now that may happen, if that's totally working for you, I don't want to interfere with that. But for me, when I pray, it really helps if I then talk to my sponsor and the other people in my life and they don't give me orders. They're not arbiters of my conduct, but they share experience, and as I see myself in their experience, I know what the right thing to do is. And one of the things my sponsor says is, I'd rather see someone follow the slightly wonky advice of a well-intentioned sponsor than their own best thinking. And when I look at all the things I've ever had to make amends for in AA, all of them were because I was following my own best thinking, and my own best thinking seemed like a good idea at the time. I've never had to make amends for something my sponsor suggested that I do. Back to Brian. I said to Brian, I'm just confused because, you know, I was reading Step 6 and 7 and the 12 and 12 this morning. I've gone to thousands of meetings. I was even being asked to chair meetings. You know, I was impressing myself. But I'm drunk. I'm just not getting something here. And I said, what am I doing wrong? He said, you're doing everything absolutely right. You're missing one thing, one crucial thing. And I said, what's that? He said, the not drinking bit of the program. Now, this isn't an invocation to say, don't drink, don't drink. I don't tell anyone not to drink, because if they're powerless over alcohol, they can't follow the instruction. People were telling me not to drink for years, and I can't follow the instruction when I give it to me, so why would I be able to follow the instruction when you give it to me? It doesn't work. So I never tell people to not drink. But Tradition 3 says the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking, or words to that effect. And I don't know about your home group, my home group, which is the Brick Lane Big Book Study in London. We don't even check that one. So when people share very confidently that they want to drink, we encourage them to keep coming back. We don't say you're no longer an AA member because you want to drink. So we've got one membership requirement, and we don't even police that one. I mean, what's the point even? I had some requirements, though. I had some requirements of AA, and they were these. I'd like your promises, please. I'd like your promises now. I'd like things. I want to feel better now. I've been thinking negatively my whole life, but I want you to say a little magic word, a little cutesy phrase, and I want to feel better. And if I don't feel better, I'm just going to have to drink at you. That was my... Now, I didn't voice this overtly in my mind, but this was my attitude. It is worth staying sober as long as, and then I had a list of conditions. I had to get to a point where, and I remember thinking this on the 24th of July, 1993, I'm fed up of wanting your wretched promises and not getting them. I'm not interested anymore. I don't care if I never work. I don't care if I don't finish college. I don't care if I never have a career. I don't care if I never have a relationship. I don't care if I never get whatever, family conference. All I want is to have the dignity of not throwing myself in front of a car because I'm drunk and full of mischief. I just want that dignity of staying sober. And as soon as that happened, the game changed. And poof, a sponsor appeared. That's how it works, by the way. There is a little puff, and then they're there. We don't know where they come from, but when you're ready, suddenly they're there. He was my first proper sponsor. I had some improper sponsors earlier. They fared less well from their improper behavior than I did. I was fine. They were the ones who were in trouble. Anyway, another story. My first proper sponsor was, he was around 30. He was sober around 10 years. He was from New York, living in London, cheerful, irrepressibly cheerful. This does not go down well with the British. He was largely loathed in the meetings I was going to. It's changed a lot. You're all safe now. It's fine. Just tone it down a little bit, that's all. Just turn the volume down and you'll be fine. But what I liked about him was he didn't care what anyone thought about him. Now, he didn't go out to be rude, he didn't go out to be hurtful, he didn't stir on purpose, he didn't have an axe to grind, he just did his thing. And if people liked it, that was fine. And if people didn't like it, that was totally fine as well. And he didn't care whether I liked him. But he was willing to offer me his time. And he said a couple of things. Actually, before I come back to him, there was someone else. There was a marvelous woman called Maureen, a housewife from South London who is now in her 80s. She's still sober. She was 19 years sober at the time, so she's some mathematician can work out how long she is sober now. She was not touchy-feely. She was not a sort of squishy, lovely, fluffy person. And she didn't pat my damp little hands and say, there, honey, you're going to be just fine. She said, you're dying of alcoholism. And I respected this because all the people that said, you're going to be just fine, I knew I wasn't. My brother was an alcoholic who killed himself at 28. I know this disease does not mess around, and I can't say as a guarantee to anyone you're going to be fine. So she didn't say to me, you're going to be fine. She said, you're dying. And the way love expressed itself in her relationship with me was that she told me a truth that might temporarily make me feel worse. She was willing to do what the book calls deepening the dilemma. Now, there are lots of people that are so damaged in a particular way that they need 6 months or 2 years or 10 years of just being hugged until they can hear some truth. But I was on a different time scale, and she knew that, and she told me the truth I needed to hear. And Doug did the same for me. He was uncompromising. I'm not sure he ever actually knew my name. He used to refer to me as Princess to all of his friends. So I'd be sitting in his flat, doing my step 4, weeping, and his friends, flying in from New York would say, who's that? He'd say, oh, it's Princess, he's doing his step work. The way he expressed love to me was not by telling me how lovable I was, or telling me how lovely I was, or how many people I would help once I got over this mild case of alcoholism. He didn't do it in the conventional ways. He was someone who had a busy, full, vibrant, exciting, thrilling, almost globe-trotting life, and yet he would take an hour out of his time to try and help me. That showed me I was worth something. It's no good telling me I'm worth something. We have a British phrase, I don't know if you have it here, fine words butter, no parsnips. And my parsnips were never buttered by fine words in AA. It was people's actions that showed me that I might have something worth recovering for. He showed me. And I wouldn't give tuppence now, knowing what I know now, for how I did the program, how I took the steps in that first year. I wouldn't give you tuppence for how I did it, but I did it, and I did it to the best of my ability. I followed the instructions of my sponsor, and whilst everyone else around me was slipping and sliding and often dying, I was not slipping, I was not sliding, I was not dying. I knew whatever I was being told worked. And I saw plenty of people in my first year, people my age, 20, 21, 22, slipping and dying that night, falling down concrete stairs. And what happened during the course of that first year was I started to get my life together again, which was splendid. I made all of the amends that I had on my list, except for those where, you know, those amends where you pitch the story to your sponsor in such a way that it becomes inconceivable that you could make amends to them. And if you're smart enough about how you do it, about what danger you're going to be in if you try to make this amend, if they're not paying attention, they'll let you get away with it. And I didn't know that I was doing this. I don't know what was going on in the other person's mind. I evaded some amends. And that's going to be an important point I'm going to come back to. Do you want to know the real reason I wanted to get sober? It's because drinking was getting in my way. It was getting in my way of getting my way. The reason my alcoholism was bothering me was not because it was killing me. It's because it was mucking up my academic future. It was mucking up my ability to work and earn money. It was mucking up my ability to sustain romantic relationships beyond an exchanged glance on a tube train. It was getting in the way of all of my major plans for ensuring that I could wrest happiness and satisfaction from the world, as the book calls it. And I spent the next 7 or 8 years in AA, working pretty hard. I had a lot of sponsees. I went to 3 or 4 meetings a week. I read AA literature. I tried to follow a spiritual path. I prayed. I even adopted a form of meditation, which I tried very, very falteringly to pursue. But I was told by a man who's referred to in London as Spiritual Paul, and I've always been mistrustful of people who have spiritual as the epithet, as a part of their name. Spiritual Paul, he said to me many years later, 10 years after this date, he said, a double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. And I was double-minded. I was happy to pay my dues to AA. There was a wonderful woman called Serena in London who said that my life is mortgaged to AA. I need to keep up the payments or I can't have my life. And for years, I thought this was one of the most wonderful things I heard. I thought it shows commitment. It shows that this is someone who is going to stay in AA forever, that realizes they need to pay their dues. But what I've realized now is I had a fundamentally wrong perception of AA. My relationship with AA was one of transaction. If I put in a little bit of footwork, then I'm going to get the Scooby snacks that the universe is promising me. And so I need to pay in just enough dues to get precisely the Scooby snacks that I want. And what is great about having your character defects slowly removed, or at least covered up with grace and charm and manipulation and other neat, more evolved character defects that we look at in Al-Anon. One of the great advantages of being socialized by AA, of being taught how to behave, about being taught how to suit up and show up, is that you can run life on self-will far more effectively than you can when you're drunk. So let's roll the tape forward to September 2001. I was, I guess, 8 years sober. I was the finance director of a firm which had grown from 20 employees to 140 employees in a year. My problems on a Friday afternoon were things like I'm £200,000 short on the payroll. If the employees don't get paid, they'll smell a rat and they'll walk. And it was one of these new businesses where you can't get people in quickly because we were the only ones doing what we were doing. And I had to phone around getting people to wire me £200,000. And I was waking up with panic attacks at 4 o'clock in the morning. And every one of my dreams had come true. I had the career that I wanted. I lived in the part of London that I wanted to live in. I had the partner, I had the house, I had the mortgage, I had the pension. I had the friends, I had the holidays in the villa overlooking the valley. And it was ashes in my mouth. And I went to lots and lots, to give myself a little bit of credit, I did ask around in AA, what do I do with this? I'm doing service. I'm sponsoring people. I'm doing my little step 10, as I called it then, nightly inventory. And I want to die most of the time. I'm going to a synagogue on a Saturday morning, doing the stuff there, so clearly there's nothing wrong in my relationship with God. This was my view then. And people said, keep coming back. Just keep doing what you're doing. It'll pass. Life doesn't stop happening just because you're sober. And my other favorite one is just let go. If I could just let go, I would have let go a long time before. And I had inventory, page after page of inventory. And I knew exactly that story in the big book about the bloke that goes to see Carl Jung, and he understands all of the workings of his mind. I knew precisely that I was insane, that my attachments were insane, but I couldn't do anything about it. And I was going around to people in AA. And I was surrounded by people in AA there were lots of people who, and some of them are friends of mine today, still, who all they needed to do was get sober, go to a meeting once or twice a week, and just be reminded periodically that they're alcoholics. And their lives just got better, incrementally. They absorbed wisdom, they absorbed common sense. And they're fine, they're good to go. And as the years pass, they get wiser and more wizened. But to an alcoholic like me, they're no good, because they don't understand why I'm waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning with panic attacks. They don't know what to do with it because they haven't had that experience since they got sober. Their primary problem, apparently, was alcohol. There were lots of other people who were just as crazy as me, but they didn't have a solution. These were the two groups. I'm guessing there must have been people in London. And I know of one or two. You know, these people that, and they're an amazing help to me now. They got sober and they find a spiritual path, whether that's Buddhism or Judaism or Christianity, and they become big in the church. They do lots of meditation courses, and their recovery becomes all about prayer and meditation, and they bring so much joy and so much wisdom into AA, and it's amazing, and I'd be dead without them as well. But they didn't know how to take someone like me and turn me into someone like them, because that hadn't been their journey. They'd got to AA, they'd found the spiritual path, and for whatever reason, that was totally working for them, and I was trying to imitate that, and it wasn't working. So what do you do when you go around all of your AA meetings and people just say, keep coming back? And it doesn't, it's not working. I'm getting worse, not better. You leave AA. And as I said earlier, I came back out of loneliness, and I come back to the point that I started. I needed to find out what was wrong with me. And I went to a step meeting. And at the time, every single step meeting in London that I was aware of used the 12 and 12, which is an amazing book, and I refer to it constantly because I had been to a step meeting, perhaps 2 a week for the first 8 years, where they read the whole step out, you know. So the first half an hour was people incompetently reading out this step. Myself included. I mean, I fancied myself this great orator. People told me afterwards I was deadly. but it's programmed into my mind. There are so many phrases that just pop out at the right time from that book. But the step one in there, great as the essay is, presumes a full knowledge of the big book. If you come at the 12 and 12 step one without having read and understood the big book, well, I didn't understand it. I didn't understand the difference between the physical craving and the mental obsession. And I went to my home group, this step group, full of amazing people who I love dearly, and I said, what is unmanageability? And I asked 10 people, and I wrote down what they said, and I got home, and I had 10 completely different answers. And I thought, this is not helping. And I'd fudged my step one the first time. My step one was basically, I drank buckets and buckets of gin and Cinzano for 4 years, burnt my life to the ground, and was suicidal most of the time. That was basically my step one. I found some tapes. Most of my recovery story, the little vignettes start with, I found some tapes. And the set of tapes I found talked about the doctor's opinion. And for the first time in my life, I'd felt inferior as an alcoholic in AA because I'd never been to prison. As my friend Tom says, I didn't have a tattoo. How could I be an alcoholic? I only drank for 4 years. And a lot of meetings were full of people whose story, when you're asked to tell your story, there's 23 minutes of drinking and 2 minutes of recovery. And that's fine. That is helpful to a lot of people. But those drinking stories are very impressive, and mine isn't. And I thought I had some kind of mild case of alcoholism. And I asked myself at 10 years sober, how do I know I must never drink again? Because if I really am going to be giving my life to AA, it has to be on a sound basis. I can't have any reservations. I can't have any doubts. Or it's like driving with a parking brake on. You can do it, but it's kind of bumpy. And looking at the big book, the doctor's opinion, and more about alcoholism, and there is a solution. My step one got really, really simple. And it's this. Left to my own devices, a drink is going to seem like a good idea. Left to my own devices. And if I start, I may never come back. And that drink could occur to me at any moment. And in the book, it says, at some point in the drinking career of every alcoholic, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. And my question was, when did that happen for me? And that happened for me the first time I drank. And I discovered I'd been a real alcoholic the whole time. It's not about the amount, it's not about the consequences, it's whether you've got this thing. And for me, it's these two components. Component number one, I'm doomed to drink. Component number two, I may never stop. And if I can't, I thought unmanageability was all about, the bedevilments. I mean, not that I didn't identify with them. Of course I identified with them. 99% of alcoholics in AA do. But as far as I'm concerned, there's a reason they're in chapter 4 and not earlier on. And the reason they're key example of an alcoholic in the big book, apart from Bill, the chap that gets the most attention in the first 43 pages plus the doctor's opinion is a man that was not neurotic and was not incompetent at living his life. So unmanageability is not, for me, from what I read in the book, is not, I'm an emotional mess and I mess things up a lot. Fred was not messing things up a lot. He was not an emotional mess, but He was not in charge of whether or not he had a drink. He was not in charge of what happened after the drink. He was not managing his life. A little demon on his shoulder which would tap him there and say, right, we're off for a drink. That demon was in charge of his life. That demon was managing his life. And suddenly I had a step one that was still true at 10 years sober, with a career and a house and a relationship and trappings and money. Not a lot of money, but a little bit of money. More than I had when I came in. 8p. I had normal stuff. I was more emotionally balanced in some ways than my non-alcoholic friends. But there was something deeply, deeply wrong with me. And you see, I don't just have a problem with alcohol. I have a problem with anything which takes me out of reality. And for me, you know, some people say if you have the misfortune to be an alcoholic, with any luck at all, you can have half a dozen other things wrong with you. And I had problems with sex. I had problems with food, specifically the not eating of food. And they're the warning signs that there is the disease of alcoholism still alive in me. And what I learnt from listening to a bunch of tapes from some Americans, one of whom is in the room, the rest of whom were dead by the time that I was listening to the tapes. I had no idea. What was clear was that I was on thin ice, and I understood why I was acting out, as we call it, left, right, and centre, why I was doing, as a chap called Bob, who says that he was doing things at 8 years sober he wouldn't want filmed and sent to GSO as an example of what 8 years sobriety could do for you. I want to, spend time with him because I understand that. And with all of that behavior, I was watching myself do it, thinking, I shouldn't be doing this, I shouldn't be doing this. I was powerless over that behavior. I was not managing my life. Sometimes people say, I decided to drink. I decided to have another drink. Now, when alcohol or some other addictive behavior, including fixing someone who is delightful and broken, when I'm tempted to go down that path, I'm not in charge. Something else is in charge of my life because I need relief. I understood why, finally, these people around me in AA, year by year, were dropping off left, right, and center. Some to alcohol, some to drugs, some just leaving and ending up highly medicated. And I started to get scared at double-digit sobriety. If this could happen to them, why couldn't it happen to me? And I had a bunch of problems with double-digit sobriety that I couldn't solve. I did not have the power to solve them. And I looked in the Big Book full of all of these promises, and I've been to Big Book meetings for years where people talk about the amazing promises, and I'd say, yes, but life is a lot more complicated than that. I didn't believe them. I didn't believe the promises. I thought the program was there to help me manage my life, not to release me from the bondage of self. And I set myself a little exercise at 15 years sober. The only way to find out whether the promises are real is to fulfill the conditions they set on achieving the promises. And at 15 years sober, I'd had as strong a program as I could, but I heard stuff on tapes made by people who by then had passed on. I heard stuff I'd never heard in London. And the two things which changed my life were the third column of the resentment inventory and this concept that David referred to of finishing amends. I felt my whole life like a pincushion that the world was constantly sticking its pins in, and I needed to learn to tolerate the unhappiness and to forgive people for the pain that they caused me. That was the image that I was working with. That was what seemed real. A lot of what I did in AA was a bit of a buffer to that, but it didn't remove the problem at source. What I've been shown, and what I've been shown by people face to face now, and not just on tapes, because I went to find these people so that I could get help face to face. What I've been taught is I am the author of my own misery. I'm not the author of your behavior, but I'm the author of my own misery. And the way I do it is this. I don't know about any of you, but as I said, when I got sober, I had a plan. And my plan was how I could get from the world all of the things that I needed for me to be okay. I needed sex, and I needed money, and I needed power, and I needed prestige, I needed to look good, and along the way, a little bit of comfort and a few thrills won't go amiss either. And the way this works with my career, I'll take that as the best example of this. I set the aim. When I get this particular job, I will have made it. In Bill's story, he's a soldier. He arrives in Plattsburgh. I've arrived. Didn't fix him. 3 pages later, 5 pages later, he's somewhere else. I've arrived. He always wants to be somewhere else, restless, irritable, and discontent. I don't know where I want to be. I don't know what I want to be doing, but I don't want to be right here. I don't want to be right now. I want to be there. And my ego is constantly saying, this, whatever this is, whoever you are wrong. I need new people, a new job, and once I get there, it's going to be fine. And so I now have a game plan. I have a structure for my day. Ego is my fuel. When it says driven by 100 forms of self-delusion, self-pity, self-seeking, those dreams, those little dreams, are the fuel in the engine and my GPS. And that is how I live. And I live life full of fear that I'm not going to get my own way, full of frustration when I don't get my own way, a moment of disappointment when I get my own way and it's ashes in my mouth, and just at the moment when I'm in despair that the whole system is corrupt, the whole system doesn't work, my ego deletes all the data, bangs down a new blueprint, right, this is what we're going to do. And just in case you haven't tried that, you can go on a very long time if you survive. What I discovered from learning how to use the third column of the resentment inventory is not just writing pride, self-esteem, personal relations, sex relations, ambition, security, and pocketbooks. It's recognizing that I am full of demands about how you see me, that's pride, about who I think I should become in life to be okay, that's self-esteem, about how everyone has to behave, that's pride, that's personal relations and sex relations. I'm full of dreams, and that's the ambitions, and I need certain things to be okay. $500,000 wouldn't hurt. As a chap called Sheldon, I think David will know him, says, I want just enough money that I don't need to rely on God. That's all. Full of demands. And I discovered that all of my resentments were not coming from your behavior. They were coming from me having a demand that you weren't meeting. And I've never found, and it's not just resentment, it talks about resentment, anger, wherever I'm hurt, wherever I'm threatened, wherever there's an injury, wherever I feel my life is being interfered with, whenever there's a grudge, whenever I'm burned up, whenever I'm sore. To me, the resentment inventory is not a resentment inventory. It's an inventory of every single type of emotional disturbance a person can experience. In the moment, persistent, recurrent, doesn't matter. And I've never found an emotional disturbance that doesn't have at its root me going into the world with a massive demand. And as a friend of mine said, it's like sowing the world with landmines, which when you step on the landmine, landmine, I'm the one that blows up. And I was blowing up constantly, and the problem was where you were stepping. And I did not realize until I was shown by people who've been using the book, who've been using the steps for decades, that there was a way out of this. And the way out of this was a radical idea. And the radical idea is hidden on page 63 of the big book. They say if you want to hide something from an alcoholic, put it somewhere prominent in the big book. I'll be okay if I stay close to God, perform his work well. Which means there's an awful lot of stuff that I need to keep my mind out of. I need to keep my mind out of what you think of me, what I think of me, how you treat me, what I want, what I need, and my money. Now, those things, it's not they don't matter. That's what I've learned. They do matter, but they're not the basis of my happiness. They're prerequisites for some effectiveness. And I entrust those to God and say, God, if you need me to do anything about those, just let me know in my morning meditation. But my real job, I've been taught, is to go through the world trying to do God's work. Now, if you're as cynical and worldly as I am, that's going to sound like a remarkably abstract and difficult prospect. What does doing God's work mean? And for me, there's nothing theological about it. There's nothing difficult about it. My sponsor, Joe McF from Texas, he was helped a lot by a man called Jim W., who's been sober since 1957, down in San Antonio, who said, what does it mean, doing God's will? He said, it's helping the rest of God's kids get their heart's desire. So my job is to go into any situation and say, what can I do for you? It's not complicated. It's not a mystery. It's pretty clear. And what I've discovered, I banked up enough days of just trying to stay close to God by keeping my mind where it wasn't wanted and keeping my mind instead on the moment and doing what's in front of me. I banked enough days trying to help other people in AA and outside AA that it started to occur to me that I don't need to get my own way for me to be okay. If I don't need to get my own way, I don't need expectations, I don't need demands. You can step on the landmine, I don't blow up. Now, this is work in progress because my ego is constantly growing back. It's constantly developing new plans. It's been to all the AA meetings I've ever been to. My ego has been sponsored by my sponsor's ego. I mean, it's been in there the whole time. It knows as much as I do. And you see, I'm busy all day. It's got the whole day free. I mean, to do the steps once and think you're done now, it's like cutting your hair and then a year later being amazed that your hair has grown back. This is just, they say that the two fatal things with alcoholics, the two things which grow back are the liver and the ego. And this is why we're screwed. But I started to get real freedom from my step 4 inventory when I started to realize that I don't have to suffer the way I've been suffering. Life doesn't stop happening, absolutely. But I have a different way to look at it. And there's a bunch of prayers, and the most amazing, there's an implied prayer on page 67, where it says, God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view. Those may not even be the exact words. But that's the idea. And it suggests to me, God, show me how to take a kindly and tolerant view. I've never prayed that prayer consistently and not had my thinking radically altered in a way that I can't get to mechanically or synthetically. I have to say to God, who I've barely mentioned, I'm so sorry. I have to say to God, I cannot think my way out of this. None of my friends can argue my way out of this. You're going to need to show me a different way to look at this. And I've had that with political stuff recently, where I've been shown why people who vote differently than me, why they do so, as if from the inside. And it just took it away. There is a solution. But the chief solution, there's a marvelous line in the 12 and 12 where it talks in step 8 about defective human relationships being the cause of all of our problems, including our alcoholism, which is a bold statement indeed. When I take step 8, how do I do the list? People talked earlier this week about you take your resentment inventory, you take the sex inventory or the conduct inventory, you get some names. I add a further test. Who would I not want to walk in through that door now? Who would I be frightened if they started publishing? And there are a lot of broken relationships in my life where I just know at cellular level I was only 1% wrong and they were 99% wrong. Or there are situations where I may not have done anything intentional to harm someone, but there was a careless match, there was a very dry field, boom. Sometimes there's no amend, but there is unfinished business, and it's up to me to go and do my utmost to sort that out. And when I was 15 years sober, I cleared up, I thought I was going to be clearing up half a dozen tiny little amends, barely worth mentioning. I got to step 8 and I said, God, show me every person in my life with whom I have unfinished business. 78 names came off the list. I made those amends in 9 days. I went for a run. I said to God, show me if there is anyone else. Nothing came in the run, and it was as though something was... around Chernobyl, they put that concrete shell to stop the radiation getting out. It felt like this concrete shell had been placed over my past. I still knew everything that had ever happened. It could be brought out in sponsoring other people. But it was no longer toxic. It was no longer radiating. And the darndest thing happened. I went to an AA meeting and realized it was full of human beings. And it suddenly occurred to me why I'd been so lonely my whole life. It's because I had unfinished business. And I try and keep the decks clear today. And I don't care who's right and who's wrong. And I don't care who started it. I need to clear the decks. Why? My other half, I've been with him for 12 years. He's not in AA, he doesn't need recovery. And we tested this out. We got together one day, we said, what questions can we ask Jonathan to find out if he needs to be in recovery? So we posed some pretty basic questions. First one, when he walks to work, it takes 25 minutes. We said to him, what do you think about when you're walking to work? He said, oh, nothing. And we said, well, what do you mean, nothing? I mean, you must be thinking something like even low-level something. And he said, not really. I keep an eye out for dogs because dogs are kind of fun and cute to look at. We think we're doing so well in here, getting all like spiritual and everything. Thousands of meetings, help from thousands of people have done for me is to get me to the baseline of where a normal person starts their day. So I don't get a medal for anything I've done in AA. This has restored me to some degree of normality. But the one thing that he says that I want to quote is about resentment. He's very senior in the organization he works in, and he makes very difficult decisions which affect hundreds of thousands of people at a time. And sometimes people get very angry with the decisions that he makes. If you make a big decision, someone's going to get angry. I know you don't have dissent in American politics, but we have dissent in British politics. Occasionally there are little arguments which get out of hand. So people resent him and vocalize their resentment publicly. And I say, how do you deal with it? And he says a number of things. He says, firstly, I know it's not about me, so I don't take it personally. Secondly, I'm embarrassed for them because it's so childish. Thirdly, they need to get over it because it gets in the way. And it's that third point which is so important. Whilst I spent so much of my recovery obsessed with my character defects and my spiritual journey and my great insights, the reason all of that work needed to be doing was because I was surrounded by people who were suffering, and my job was to show them how I had been relieved. And there is a line in AA, not to say no to an AA request. My sponsor's modified that for me. He says not to say no to a reasonable AA request. I'm not always the right person to handle a cry for help, but I will find the right person. If I've got a friend who's sponsoring one person and has 7 free hours a day for the next week, and a new person comes in, maybe the person with 7 free hours a day is the best person. But what this means is that my number one priority is not my relationship, it's not my job, it's not my money. And I'm going to say something controversial. I know what I'm supposed to say. I know what I'm supposed to say is my number one priority is my relationship with God. I've been trained to say that, but I'm not a theologian, which is why I've said very little about God. I'm not in a position to say anything about God. I don't know anything about physics. Well, a little. But basically, I know very little about physics. But I know how to operate a light switch in a kettle. I don't know much about God. I don't know much about a relationship with God. But I know how to operate the tools of AA. And they're all about how I can be of help to other people in my life. And there are days when I could work more. I have my own business, so I get to choose how much I work. I could work more, but for whatever reason, people want to talk about their problems and hear me talk about mine. So I spend 3 or 4 hours with other people in AA, and this happens day after day after day. I didn't design that. They asked for help. I said yes. And the money works out. I don't know how. The career works out. I don't know. I just say yes. I have 2 home groups. I'm active in service at both of those. I'm active in the AA service structure. I'm part of a team of national liaison officers. We liaise between AA and the armed services and the veterans community, which means we have top-level access to the Ministry of Defence, the top brass of the British Army, the Royal Air Force and the Navy. And there are 5 million veterans in the UK. So we have a lot of people that we can potentially help. I wrote a letter which went out to a letter with a presentation which went out to 1,500 health professionals whose life is devoted to helping ex-service personnel, a very large proportion of whom are alcoholics. I do that, and I come home, and I want to be interested in my spiritual life. I do, because I need to keep the channels clear. So my spiritual life is not an end in itself. It's to make me, so that when I'm presenting to GPs, to general practitioners, doctors, I'm clear, I'm lucid, I can look at the situation from their point of view and say, how can I present AA as best as I can to them? That's what it's about. Because I found, I'm going to say one last thing. The reason I found AA was this. February 1993. I'd never heard of AA. I didn't know AA existed, didn't know treatment existed. I was really drunk. You have to be really drunk not to know that AA exists. But I was. I was walking through the hall of the house I lived in, and there was a telephone table. It was a shared accommodation, so the telephone was on a table in the hallway. And there was a yellow pages underneath it, and a voice said, "Look up alcohol." I didn't want to give up alcohol. I didn't want to stop drinking. I looked up, a thought crossed my mind. I didn't have any choice what I did with the thought that crossed my mind. It said, "Look up alcohol." Someone had done some service in AA and made sure there was an ad for Alcoholics Anonymous at the top of the page A. And I called it. I called the number. It was 2 minutes past 10. The telephone office in London opened at 10 a.m. that morning. Someone was on time for their service, so they answered. And I'm here today. Thank you very much.